Hello everyone. As I'm sure the vast majority of you know by now, this past week the chess world experienced an unthinkable tragedy in the untimely passing of the beloved chess player, chess educator, and chess influencer Daniel Naroditsky. This came as quite a shock to me, and I think to a lot of other people as well. He was only 29 years old, but what he was able to accomplish in those 29 years was truly incredible. Not only was Daniel one of the most talented players of our time, but he was also a great chess teacher. His ability to entertain while explaining very deep concepts in a way that even a beginner could learn from was really unrivaled. So, having said that, I think that the best way that I can honor his memory is to show you some of his best games. He's produced so many brilliancies over the years that I couldn't settle on just one, so what I'm going to do is show you one full game, followed by 3 of his most brilliant combinations, the last of which is an unbelievable sequence with which he defeated none other than Magnus Carlsen. So let's get right into it. The first game we're going to look at was played in December of 2020. It has a classical time control. I believe this was the online qualifier for the 2021 US Championship. Daniel Naroditsky has the white pieces. He's up against the strong grandmaster Timur Gureyev, and he opens with e4. Timur responds e5, and now we have a slightly unusual move, bishop to c4, known as the bishop's opening. One key difference between this move and the more popular knight to f3 is that white keeps the move f4 on the table, which is eventually played in this game. Timur responds knight to f6, attacking e4. Daniel defends with d3. We have knight to c6, knight to c3, and now knight to a5, when it looks like Timur is going for that generally favorable knight for bishop trade. But after knight g to e2 from Daniel, he does not take the bishop on c4, seeing that after d takes c4, white has some very nice central control, clamping down on the d5 square, where he'll probably be posting a knight eventually, unless black prevents it by playing c6. That, of course, would leave him with a backward d-pawn on a half-opened file. Not a great thing to have, unless you can arrange the move d5, but that's not going to be so easy. So what's played in the game is not an immediate capture of the bishop, but rather c6, supporting that possible d5 and or b5 with tempo on the bishop. In apparent anticipation of this, Daniel drops his bishop back to b3. Now this is not a very popular move. Mainline theory says to just leave the bishop on c4 and castle. Then if black plays d5, you can trade pawns and then put your bishop on b5 with check. But either way, the position is roughly equal. Taking the bishop on b3 is okay here, but that would of course allow white to activate his a1 rook with a takes b3. So we instead have bishop to c5, back-to-back castling, and now bishop to g5, pinning black's knight to his queen. h6 puts the question to that bishop, h4 is the answer, and now comes bishop to e7, breaking the pin at the cost of falling a bit further behind in piece development as a consequence of having moved the bishop a second time. Daniel now decides it's a good time to strike in the center with d4, which is often a very good thing to do when you're ahead in piece development. Stockfish is nodding in approval. Timur plays d6, supporting his attacked e5 pawn, and now we have queen to d3 connecting the rooks, while controlling some key light squares. Next is b5, probably looking to harass the knight on c3 with b4 next. Daniel hits the center again with f4, attacking e5 a second time. Now the engine doesn't like this, saying that black can get a sizable advantage here with knight takes b3, when after a takes b3 and e takes f4, if the knight were to recapture, then g5 would be a fork. So white should first throw in bishop takes f6, when after bishop takes f6 and knight takes f4, white's got the doubled pawns, black's got the bishop pair, and according to Stockfish, a significant advantage. Is it quite winning? I don't know. But what's played in the game is the slightly less engine-approved e takes d4. And after knight takes d4, we have the strong follow-up b4, kicking the knight away from its defensive e4. Daniel puts it on its best square, a4. Why not e2? Well, it's because black has a little trick in this position with knight takes e4, with a discovered attack on the undefended h4 bishop, when bishop takes e7 could be met with queen takes e7, defending the knight on e4. White could then respond rook a to e1, which would create an uncomfortable pin on that knight to the black queen, but only if the e-file is clear. So that's why you don't want the knight sitting on e2. So no knight takes e4 played in the game, since it's not really worth it for black in this position. Instead, we have the much superior c5, kicking the knight out of the center. Daniel puts it on f3, at which point black's best move seems to be knight to h5, bringing the dark square bishops into contact with some annoying pressure on the f4 pawn, which white doesn't really have a convenient way to defend. g3 would of course be very weakening, allowing the bishop into h3. Defending with the queen would remove defense from c4, allowing black to push his pawn there, trapping white's bishop, which incidentally is what Timur plays in this position, sacrificing a pawn now to bishop takes c4, knight takes c4, and queen takes c4. So what's the thinking here? See if you can guess what Timur's tactical justification for this is. What's played is queen to a5, with the dual threat of queen takes knight on a4 and bishop to a6, defended by the queen, skewering the white queen and rook. So, is Daniel just losing here? No, he has a single move that maintains equality, and it's not queen to b3 defending the knight, as that would run him into a big disaster with bishop to e6, driving his queen away. The correct move, now played by Daniel, is e5, attacking the knight on f6, which is kind of sort of pinned to the bishop on e7. I mean, you can play knight to d5, but then after bishop takes bishop and the knight recaptures, there's e takes d6, attacking the knight again. If you take on e5 first, well then white's knight will be able to jump into c5, preventing bishop to a6. So Timur just ignores the kingside situation and plays his bishop to a6 straight away, hitting the queen, and after queen to b3, he does now take the rook on f1. Daniel, of course, takes on f6. He's now attacking both of black's bishops at once, and this would be a winning turn of events for white, if not for the fact that black has bishop to b5, counterattacking the trapped knight on a4. Of course, Daniel's capture of the bishop on e7 does now come with an attack on black's rook, so that's got to be dealt with. The rook goes to c8, leaving white's twice attacked knight trapped on a4 with no way to save it, so Daniel just puts his queen on a nice central square, pinning bishop to queen, thus necessitating queen takes a4. He's now able to get his knight back into the center with tempo on the bishop, and this is a good moment to stop and assess. White is the exchange down, having only one rook, but he does have ample compensation with his very scary looking extra pawn sitting on e7, only one step from promotion, defended by his bishop. So with perfect play from both sides, the engine is still predicting a draw. Timur retreats his attacked bishop to e8, looks very natural, getting in front of the pawn. Bishop to c6 may have been a bit better, attacking the white queen, since if knight takes bishop, well, now you're trading pieces, which is not really what you want to be doing when you're a bit down in material, especially in a position like this, where black has the potential to play f6 at some point, cutting off the bishop's defense from the pawn on e7, which could then be rounded up. Daniel wants to keep as many pieces on board as possible so that he can generate some kingside threats and keep black on the ropes, and this is why he doesn't capture the pawn on d6, since black could then re-centralize his queen with queen to d7, and then white would have to retreat his queen if he is to avoid a trade of queens. What's played is rook to e1, planning a rook lift to e3, and you could probably guess where that rook is headed next, but if you can't, you're going to find out in exactly 3 moves. Next is rook a to b8, getting out of the view of the white queen, and so enabling Timur to meet rook to e3 with rook to c5, attacking the queen without losing his rook. Daniel now grabs the pawn on d6, attacking both undefended rooks, so there's no time for any queen to d7 here. We have rook b to c8, connecting those castles, and now comes rook to g3, and with it, the very serious threat of queen takes h6, exploiting the pin on the g7 pawn. And this is a very difficult threat to deal with. In fact, black has only one move that will maintain equality, and it's not an easy one to spot. Pause the video and have a look if you'd like. The move, not played in the game, is rook takes c2. You gotta go after the white king, that's the only hope. If white were to now take on h6, then he'd run into big trouble with rook to c1 check, king to f2, and rook 8 to c2 check, driving his king up the board. And I'll let your imagination take it from there, although I will say that black may have to sacrifice a rook on c3 with check in order to give his queen access to d1 when the moment is right. So do with that information what you will. But let's have a look at white's correct response, which is the obvious knight takes rook on c2, to which black should respond queen takes c2. Now white still can't take on h6, as this would give black a forced mate in 5 with queen to d1 check, followed by rook to c2 check, etc. White has a few decent defenses though. I'll just show you one option, h3, giving the king a square, when after queen to b1 check, king to h2, and rook to c1, again threatening mate. White's rook will not be able to stay on the g-file, maintaining the pin on g7. He's got to defend with something like rook to e3. And just to show you why this is the case, if instead rook to g4 is played, giving the king a square, then black has checkmate in 6 moves with rook to h1 check, king to g3, and queen to e1 check, a move that would not be possible if the rook had moved to e3 instead of to g4. But here it's mate in 4 with king to f3, rook to f1 check, bishop to f2, rook takes f2 check, king to g3, rook to f1 discovered check, king to h2, and rook to h1 check mate. How pretty is that? Okay, I think we've covered our bases, or at least we've sprinkled them with enough analysis to justify getting back to the game. Where in this position, after rook to g3, Timur very understandably does not find his only good move, rook takes c2, and instead plays the quite natural looking king to h7, just breaking the pin on his g-pawn. Looks pretty reasonable. Queen takes h6 is no longer a threat, but you know what is a threat? Pause and ponder the answer to that question if you so desire, but here it comes. The beautiful and checkmate forcing rook takes g7 check. Black has only 2 legal moves. King to h8 would allow queen takes h6 checkmate, so the rook must be captured, but here comes the queen into f6 with check. Now it's a question of king to g8 or king to h7. Timur puts his king on g8, which is the best try, although totally losing. But the point is, if Daniel were to play knight to f5, threatening checkmate on g7, then black could actually win with rook takes f5, when after queen takes f5, his king would not be in check, as it would be if he had moved it to h7. Then he could just play queen takes c2, hitting the queen, threatening a mate, beginning with queen to c1 check, and white is finished. Of course, if the black king were in check and had to move, it would be a totally different story, and white would be the one forcing mate. So just to demonstrate that, if black were to make some pointless move here like a5, then we would have queen to g4 check, king to h7, and bishop to f6, with the unstoppable mate on g7 coming next. So after Timur's move, king to g8, knight to f5 is not played, but in this position, Daniel has something just as crushing. Pause the video if you'd like to try and spot it. It's a forced mate in 6, beginning with knight to e6, threatening mate on g7. Timur has no choice but to capture the knight, as there was no way to defend g7 except by sacrificing his rook on g5, which would have solved nothing. This allows the queen into f8 with check, driving the king to h7, after which bishop to f6 once again threatens mate on g7. If the king tries to run to g6, then there's just g4 guarding the light squares, with queen to g7 mate coming next. So what's tried is the desperado rook to g5, defending g7, but after f takes g5, again, nothing has been solved, and after king to g6, we now have the move g4, keeping the king out of f5 and h5, and so ensuring that after anything Timur plays, which in the game happens to be b3, Daniel can and now does execute checkmate with queen to g7 mate. So what a beautiful sequence, investing 2 pieces in order to achieve this picturesque checkmate with the help of a lowly pawn. But we're just getting warmed up, and this next combination is really a thing of beauty. We join the game in this position, where Daniel Naroditsky has the black pieces against the American Grandmaster Brandon Jacobson in this 3-minute blitz encounter played in late 2020. It's white to move, and Brandon has himself a winning position, but only if he moves his rook, which is under attack by Daniel's knight. Rook takes a7 is the top choice of the engine, but he gets a bit greedy and thinks that he can get away with taking the knight on c5. A big mistake. This gives Daniel a stunning 6-move winning combination that he now executes with flawless precision. Go ahead and pause the video if you'd like to take a crack at it. It begins with the truly gorgeous queen takes h2 check. King takes h2 is the only move, and now comes rook to h6 check. King to g1 would of course run into rook to h1 checkmate, so king to g3 is necessary. And what do you think the move is here? Well, it's knight to h1 check, sacrificing the bishop now to white's only legal move, king takes g4. And here we have a checkmate in 3. If you couldn't work it out before, maybe you'd like to try again from this position. It begins with rook to f4 check, forcing the king to take on g5, when after rook to g6 check and white's only move, king to h5, there comes knight to g3 check and mate. And what a beautiful mate it is, with each of the white king squares guarded by only 1 piece, with no redundancy. I think it's called a pure mate. Simply lovely. Okay, moving right along, We join the next game in this position where Daniel Naroditsky is playing black. He's just made a recapture on b8 with his rook, pinning the b pawn of his opponent, Vietnamese Grandmaster Lê Tuan Minh, to his king, and so threatening knight takes c3. White's only good defense is to move his king, but which direction should it go? It's not an easy question, and it's one that Lê Tuan Minh now answers incorrectly with his response king to a1. What could be more natural? Well, king to c1 was actually correct, but understanding why, especially in a game of blitz, requires some phenomenal board vision. Pause the video if you want to take a crack at finding black's winning combination, but here it comes, beginning with knight takes c3. Now first things first, if white doesn't take the knight, then it can just go to a4, defended by the queen, ganging up on the pinned b2 pawn, and everything just falls apart. So we do have b takes c3, but now what? Where is black's next target? The pinned pawn on c3 can't be attacked again, so is white just winning here? Well, he would be, if not for an absolutely savage move that is about as beautiful as they come. Now played by Daniel, queen to a4, attacking the queen on c2, which may not capture the queen, or else bishop takes c3 will be checkmate. Now, did Lê Tuan Minh completely miss this move? Well, he may not have, since after his response, queen to c1, maintaining that critical defense of the pawn on c3, it looks like white just might be okay. But are you ready to see something really sick? Check this out. Queen to d1, attacking the queen again, which is not free to capture on d1 since bishop takes c3 would be mate. But even if white leaves the queen where it is, he's still getting checkmated since the queen is now pinned to the king and therefore no longer defending c3. So in this position, Lê Tuan Minh decides to resign the game, seeing that if he were to try to defend the pawn with bishop to d2, then bishop takes c3 check, followed by queen takes c1 would be mate. And if he tries to give his king a square, let's say with a3, well then black has checkmate in 2 with bishop takes c3 check, king to a2, and queen to b3 checkmate. So how on earth does one find a sequence like that in a game of blitz, or in any kind of game? Well, step 1, be a chess genius. I'm still working on that one. I don't think it's going to happen, but let's move on to our final position. This is from a bullet game played in 2021 on LeChess.org. Daniel Naroditsky again has black, and on the white end is none other than the great Magnus Carlsen. Now, I made a video on this one a while back where I suggested that this might be the greatest bullet game ever played, and when you see the winning combination that Daniel is able to unravel here, you just might have no choice but to agree. Magnus has just pushed his pawn from f3 to f4, maybe looking to play f5 next, trapping Daniel's bishop. But what he should have played is something like knight to c3, giving his king a little extra cover, and the reason is far from obvious. But if you want to try and work it out, go ahead and give it a shot. The winning move, now found and executed by Daniel Naroditsky, is bishop to b3, attacking the pawn on c2 with the second piece, while taking advantage of the forkable relationship of white's king and queen. For if pawn takes bishop were to be played, then knight takes b3 with check would win the white queen. So Magnus puts his bishop on d3, since that's the only way to defend his c-pawn. Pushing it to c3 would of course lose the exchange to bishop takes d1, but now comes c4, simply attacking the bishop. If it moves, then the pawn on c2 falls. You still can't take the bishop on b3 or you're getting forked. But what about bishop takes c4, the move now played by Magnus, exposing the knight on d4 to a double attack? Well, here black has several crushing options. One of them being bishop takes c2 when queen takes d4 can be met with bishop takes e4, hitting that undefended rook on h1, when one way or another white is going to be losing material. But Daniel's move is even more striking. He plays rook a to c8, at which point we get to see the big drawback of Magnus not having his knight on c3 to help shield his king, since if it were on c3, he could just win a piece here with bishop takes b3, when knight takes b3 would not be checkmate as it is here, since the pawn on c2 would not be pinned to the king and therefore able to recapture the knight. What Magnus tries in the game is really the only reasonable thing he can try, since his bishop is attacked twice, and if it moves, the pawn on c2 will fall with devastating effect. He captures the knight on d4. But now comes rook takes c4 with tempo on the queen, threatening rook takes c2 checkmate. Gotta defend against that. Magnus puts his queen on d3. He's already accepted that he's going to have to sacrifice it for Daniel's rook and bishop if rook takes c2 is played, but in this position, Daniel has something much more elegant and savage at the same time. Are you ready for this? The move is queen to e3 check. What a disaster for chess goat Magnus Carlsen. He's got 4 moves that get him out of check, but they all utterly fail. Queen takes queen, of course, runs into rook takes c2 mate, but so does queen to d2, which does not defend the c2 pawn as the queen is pinned to the king. You can try knight to d2, but then you lose your queen to queen takes d3 since the pawn may not recapture, with mate coming in another 4 moves. Or you can play Magnus's move, rook to d2. But now for the final blow, rook takes c2 check. A move that in this position convinces Magnus Carlsen to call it a day and resign the game. White's only got 2 moves. If king to d1, then rook takes rook with a discovered check by the bishop will force the king back to c1, after which rook to d1 with a discovered check by the queen will be mate. If queen takes rook, then after bishop takes c2 and king takes c2, black has queen takes e4 check, picking up the rook on h1. Although after the engine's top move, king to c1, black's quickest way to win is actually with knight to c5, with mate coming in 11 moves. So was that not astonishing? Can you even imagine playing like that in a bullet game? I don't know how many of you have ever tried bullet chess before, but to me, it just feels like chaos. There's just no time for anything. So I can't even imagine what kind of mind is capable of finding a combination like this. The world has certainly lost a great genius. Daniel Naroditsky has given so much to this game that we love, and I have no doubt that he will forever be remembered as the kind and giving person that he was, as well as for the fearless and ferocious attacking chess that he blessed us with, and which I'm sure will be enjoyed and studied for many years to come. So that's all for now. Thank you for watching. Feel free to share your thoughts about the great Daniel Naroditsky in the comments, and I will see you soon.